Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
And one, we are now recording. Joseph Hopkins, welcome to Weird Web Radio. It's awesome to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm really glad we could work this out. For folks that don't know who Joseph is, Joseph Hopkins is an American writer, editor, and researcher. Hyldyr's founder and author of numerous resources and articles in the realm of folklore studies and linguistics. Hopkins also operates Mimisbrunnr.info, which is a fantastic site. I cannot recommend it enough. A resource that developed out of a reading group at the University of Georgia's Department of Germanic and Slavic Studies. That's a mouthful. You make people say that real fast to get like their keys back on a night out at the bar.
Yeah, you get it down with repetition.
Yeah. And it says you've edited for the University of Helsinki's Retrospective Methods Network newsletter for over a decade. Sounds like quite a lot. Okay, cool. Well, right out of the gate, maybe we should define some terms now I'm thinking about it. When we say Germanic and Nordic, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so when you say Germanic, typically we're talking about a group of speech groups. So these people speak Germanic languages, and in the past, these groups were much more defined on the historical stage than they would be today. You know, for example, English has become a really, really common language across the world, and that is a pretty recent development historically. Whereas in the past, many, many years ago, there was a smaller community that spoke Germanic languages, and over time, that community spread out, split into branches, west, north, east, and became definable, I should say, by those branches in various areas. They had a lot in common, legends. They had a shared alphabet, the runes, which appear to have been exclusively used by Germanic speakers. And when we say Nordic, we're really kind of talking about a region, mostly Scandinavia and the Scandinavian cultural sphere. In this region, there are various linguistic groups, but one of the major ones and the biggest one is North Germanic.
Okay, cool. I suppose with your background and all the things you do, the inroad for a lot of this, when did you become interested and curious about Nordic mythology?
I first encountered it as a teenager, actually, and I encountered it by way of interest in all sorts of obscure and topics associated with like musical scenes, black metal and post-industrial music and things like this over the years. I also had a long interest in history and folklore. Really, folklore was my ramp to this topic. As a child, I was very, very interested in the Grimm's Tales. I was really interested in American folklore. You may have heard of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Mm-hmm. That series with its really evocative illustrations. Ghostlore also of great interest to me, and that sort of folklore focused approach eventually led me to more serious study in these things. So got into historical linguistics and folklore studies on a more on a formal level, for example.
If Ghostlore was one of those things, have you got a favorite that stands out from that time?
Well, I actually did a lot of field research on Ghostlore while I was at the University of Georgia. You can find on my academia.edu page a study of Ghostlore in that whole geographic region, but centered on the University of Georgia area. Joe Brown Hall at the Department of Germanic and Slavic Studies at the University of Georgia has a really interesting, I guess you could say, thread of Ghostlore around it that is actually turns out a development of an actual event in the 70s and all sorts of changes with the buildings and things like this. The whole thing is really interesting, but it is a long story. I would say check out my academia.edu page if you like. to get some more details on that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. We're big fans of ghost stories around here. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, ghost stories are great. Mm-hmm.
Big fans.
Love it. Funny, romantic, scary. I mean, what more can you ask for in a genre?
Right. Not to mention, I don't know how much this relates to wider folklore, but because I'm not as well versed in that area, but Ghostlore itself also seems to capture within the story really cool elements of local history.
Yes, that's a common element of Ghostlore. They tend to be pretty localized ghost stories and become associated with specific locations and things like this. I love Ghostlore. I think it's fantastic. People across the world appear to have always had some form of Ghostlore. We find it in like ancient Greece, for example, ghost stories that are very, very similar to contemporary ghost stories. And no doubt it's something that exists in, ancient pre-Christian Germanic speaking regions as well. Although we don't really have, good records of this. It seems to have just been a widespread human concern, but again, it can come in many different forms. Ghosts can be funny. They can be scary. They can be romantic. You get the human condition, in these stories. I really love Ghostlore and intend to do some future work in this area as well.
Nice. You say they come in different forms. It makes me think of when we think of ghosts here, especially in the United States, probably throughout Europe, they're often, you can't see them, and if you can, they're very translucent. That kind of thing within the stories. There's no real physical quality to them except for maybe the phenomena that surrounds them in the story.
I think a sort of canonization of ghosts has occurred in contemporary pop culture, where we kind of think of them now as these especially in the United States, as these kind of translucent, non-physical, like bed sheets that are a specific kind of shade of kind of greeny blue. You know what I'm saying? It's been interesting to go back a little further and see, for example, in Athens, Georgia, there are stories where people attempt to shoot the ghosts. The idea that you could, and so they were fined for opening fire in a public place and things like this. And there's also pranking that was going on where people were pretending to be ghosts and apparently at risk of being shot. So there has certainly been a change that has happened over time, and the idea of a ghost has really become basically like Boo Berry or whatever on the cereal front, the cereal cover. But in the past, things were a little different. It's really this kind of anarchic collection of motifs. It seems over time, where they could have a body or they could be bodiless. It's an interesting thing, and it also just sort of seems to exist outside of a official version of religion, an official version of belief a lot of the time, which is also very interesting to me.
That is interesting, because you'll see people talk about online. I see this a lot, where they're very quick to remind someone, well, in like Iceland, they didn't believe in a ghost like you do. They had draugrs. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair comparison when you see a comment like that?
I would say to keep an open mind about how ghosts and the undead were perceived in these areas, because it tends to be a lot more complex than it may initially seem.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So your interests in folklore take you down a pretty cool academic path, right?
I think so.
Yeah. I guess what I'm curious about in your past and as you became who you are, when does that teenage interest in folklore and ghost lore, mythology, etc., when do you decide that that's going to be like an academic pursuit, and how do you even start down a path like that?
So various educational institutions offer programs or have departments where you can get a degree in these topics. Folklore studies, that's a formal discipline. And certain universities in the United States still offer like a BA in folklore studies, and you can potentially take it to the PhD level and beyond, right? As for linguistics, which is another major area of interest of mine and focus, you can go to specific schools and also, start out with like a basic linguistics degree and then get into historical linguistics as a narrowed focus after that. And historical linguistics is, of course, a necessary tool for really being able to get the most out of manuscript analysis and so on. You can really come to some incredible conclusions with some very good evidence with historical linguistics. It's almost a kind of linguistic necromancy. It's actually amazing that it's something that is doable. A lot of reconstructed forms, for example, it's really hard to argue against their reconstruction. The evidence is just so very, very strong. And a lot of the basis of historical linguistics begins with Germanic studies, right? So the study of the Germanic languages. And that begins with figures like Rasmus Rask and Jakob Grimm, who were, making some really important observations, some really revolutionary observations that produced the foundations that we have today of linguistics as a science. And it's also these circles where we start to get folklore studies as a science as well. We start getting comparative data. We start seeing scientific observations. We start to see a much more objective and research-based approach. And of course, these fields have changed quite radically since then. But things like what we call today Grimm's Law, the first Germanic sound shift, it's still a foundational principle. That observation was quite incredible. So the further you go back, the more of this sort of thing you find in the development of these disciplines. Archaeology was hugely impacted by Scandinavian archaeologists as well. It's something I encourage people to dig into, the history of these academic disciplines today, and really to learn about them. It's a fascinating topic. I mean, folklore studies is just incredibly interesting. And all these tools have been applied quite widely since then. Reconstructing protoforms, that's been done across the world since then and applied to just about every language family you can imagine. Had some really incredible insight about history from this. It's an endlessly useful tool, and it's really something that when it appeared really changed everything. There was no equivalent to this, for example, in ancient Greece. Linguistics was a really, really primitive thing at the time. Until Grimm's Law, it was really a kind of guessing game more than anything. But at that point, from then and the developments that have occurred since then, you're really dealing with a hardcore science.
Fascinating. Truly is. Because I get in discussions sometimes with people, tell them like language doesn't just pop out as it is.
No.
It evolves over time. It comes from somewhere.
Yeah, it changes, and it's a regular change too, which is even more interesting. So it's not, we can't predict how language will change, but we can certainly map out how it has changed, and with quite a high degree of confidence, depending on the data set that we have in our hands. So if anybody is even remotely interested in historical linguistics that is listening to this, I recommend digging deeper into it. I would say a good way to start is to just buy a introductory handbook for historical linguistics and to just dig in. You're going to be amazed by the stuff that you encounter there. It is really, really incredible.
Now, something I've seen referenced a lot over the years, pursuing my own interests in modern heathenry and stuff.
Sure.
You'll see at times when you get into the history chapters of things where they talk about Proto-Indo-European.
Yeah.
And how that is a reconstruct. It always has an asterisk next to it. And I guess one, what is that asterisk always there for? And two, how do we reconstruct a language that no one knows what it sounds like?
Yeah, so the asterisk is it indicates a reconstruction, and it just makes it easier when you're in a discussion with a lot of data to detect a reconstruction versus something that is attested somewhere, as in that it is found somewhere, right? You want to be really clear about that when you get into these really data heavy, really complex discussions. So there's just no confusion about it. When you study something like Indo-European studies, you're dealing with a lot of data, and there are very few people who will really know these languages inside and out, when they're approaching them. So it's really um, interdisciplinary. If you've been studying like uh, Iranian, your whole life, or some other related language like Vedic Sanskrit or something like this, there's a good chance that you don't have a lot of background in like Proto-Germanic or anything like that. So, you got to deal with, although they come from the same origin, ultimately, you really have to work with other scholars who specialize in these things. And this is a really, really common thing in historical linguistics. I would say, Proto-Indo-European is a really secure reconstruction. It is really, really well evidenced, but there is disagreement about, this or that, or I should say, these disagreements really come down to options that are not clear at the end of the day among academics. There are reconstructions that are really firm ground, and there are reconstructions that are on less firm ground. It's just because we just don't have enough data for it. You know what I mean? So it is a really interesting topic. A lot of things can be discerned from the reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European, things involving technology. And nowadays you have archaeogenetics making like huge, just massive, crazy strides.
What is archaeogenetics? I don't mean to interrupt your thought, but
Sure.
That's a phrase I've never heard.
Yeah, archaeogenetics is one of the most innovative and growing fields today related to these topics. And what it is genetics. So the study of typically of like, bone samples that they will apply to the archaeological record as a wider phenomenon, right? So by detecting, what the genetic makeup is of graves in certain areas and then comparing them to others, they can, scholars can assess movement of peoples, for example, because that, genetic line will be shown to exist here at this point, but then disappear at that point. And that has led to some huge developments in the past 5 years, especially. It's been a really major time for this topic in academia.
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, from 10 years from now, I mean, we're going to hear a lot more from this because it's really all about data and quality of data. And then you can apply this to linguistics and the historical record. And you can really get a much clearer picture as to what is really going on. We find a lot of hidden stories this way, movement of peoples that previously was unknown, for example. And this picture is probably just going to get, clearer and clearer, especially as the technology increases. So in Indo-European studies, archaeogenetics has become a huge driver for discussion. And it's just kind of amazing some of the stuff that has come out of this. And this is mainstream scholarship we're talking about here. This is no longer a kind of experimental tool. This is a huge driver of discussion in things like Indo-European studies and other fields as well. Like I said, this stuff can be applied anywhere in the world as long as the data is there. So we end up with knowledge of proto-languages and all sorts of stories that we didn't have before.
Yeah. Is there? I don't know. I don't think I want to ask it that way.
Sure.
I'm not sure how I want to ask this. What I'm thinking of is like when a grave is found with significant items in it.
Yeah.
How does that? How is that approached by professionals? And like, it feels to me like people are waiting with bated breath almost. Like, is it going to destroy my favorite theory, or is it going to open up new doors? Like, how does a significant new find ripple through the professional landscape?
Well, I wish I could say that there's a unified place where you could go and just get news and updates on this stuff because it can be pretty frustrating, I have to say. Major runic finds, for example, in runology occur pretty regularly nowadays, but it may be that you don't hear about it until like a year later or something. You know what I mean? Even if you're a specialist, right? So it would be excellent if there was some sort of news desk for this stuff. Now, sadly, a lot of really interesting finds also just completely live in obscurity, right?
Really?
Like if I go to I remember being at the University of Aarhus in Denmark, I lived in Denmark for quite some time. And when I was there, I would just dig through old find reports, and I would just find all sorts of stuff and be like, this is incredible. I've never seen this object. This was really common, or never heard anybody talk about it. So when we talk about things like Germanic paganism or Scandinavian Viking Age paganism, there often is a sort of little canon of objects that we see over and over again, right? And these are typically the ones that are on display at museums or have just been made accessible in some way, shape, or form. But the reality is that there's way, way, way more than this tucked away in the bowels of these collections at museums, right? That just never see the light of day, and nobody really talks about. Or there will be finds that somebody, especially lately, will find with a metal detector in areas that allow this, right? And there might be like a tiny little press release somewhere about it, or maybe not even that, and then they're just returned to the finder, right? So in short, I would say that keep in mind that every time you see like a Thor's hammer amulet, there have been many, 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 many more of them that have been found that they simply, press didn't pick up on, or didn't really see any notable attention. And some of these finds will later turn out to be like major finds, right? Some of their most recent major runic finds will get reported in the media a little while after they've been found, but most of them are ignored by media. Most people don't know what runes are. It's not exactly big news to most people. It requires a lot of context oftentimes to really understand what the value is of some of these things. Just as another example, stuff from the migration period tends to get mislabeled as like, Viking Age or something like this. And that's typically because people don't know what the migration period was. Just as another example. So what I'm really doing here is complaining that there is no central news desk, and that I have, missed major finds myself that I would love to have mentioned or pointed people to discuss more. And it's a plea for someone to build some kind of quality news desk where we can aggregate, these reports where they do appear, because staying abreast of this stuff is really tough, even among specialists.
Okay. You mentioned runic finds more than once in that answer. Yeah. What's a recent runic find that you got excited about or really got interested in?
I really love to see pictures of new bracteates, for example. Around, I believe it's like half the elderflular corpus is found on these little gold amulets. And they have a really finite number of motifs that appear on the amulets and sort of get rearranged, especially the C-type bracteates. I am always really interested in this. I'm also interested in just odd runic inscriptions. Runology is a subfield of Germanic philology, and there are really, really good resources for this now available. For example, Göttingen University in Germany put together the runes database, and I can give you a link to that to share. And it's really a must-use resource now for anybody in runology, because runology comes with a lot of complexities, right? So if you're trying to study runes and you're getting a transcription of some kind of the inscription, and it doesn't include all these strange variations in the rune forms, and it gets really complicated fast. So to have a really good database like that provides all sorts of data, all sorts of different interpretations, and where to dig into that stuff, as well as actually breaking down the individual rune forms, all of that is really, really interesting and really, really useful.
As something associated with runes that I get asked a lot,
sure,
is where do the rune poems come from? Because I think people have a sense that rune poems are as old as the rune stones themselves.
Yeah.
Are they important to the process of understanding what all the runes mean from a runologist's point of view?
The rune poems are very valuable. Yes, they provide they provide names for runes, right? For one, they're also works of alliterative verse mostly. And alliterative verse is a traditional Germanic form of poetry that we have attested as far back as the one of the two golden horns of Galahus, right? So, and that's around like 400s. right? So this any instance of a literate verse like this, first of all, is valuable and interesting, and second of all, for them to be associated with runes is super interesting, right? It may be that for as long as we've had, as long as the runes have had their very specific and very interesting order, which appears to have been there from the very beginning as a component of the development of the early runic alphabet, the Elder Futhark, then there may have been some sort of oral tradition surrounding it that was poetic in this sense, right? So these rune poems were quite likely ultimately just as old as the alphabet it is itself, in my opinion, because alliterative verse is quite old, and we would expect there to be some sort of alliterative verse element, perhaps, to the alphabet itself, right? That makes the most sense to me. Now, the rune poems are attested considerably later because we get them in manuscript culture, right? So you have to first have manuscript culture in place, which was something that was introduced to the area during Christianization, right? So I would say my take is I would expect there to be alliterative verse around the runic order, and that would therefore be a rune poem. Now, whether or not it reflects what we see in some of the later rune poems is another question. Those names are clearly later developments post Elder Futhark, and there is some disagreement in the names as we find them later, some of which is difficult to explain. So it's a complex topic, but it is a fascinating one, and runic developments continue to occur regularly. So we'll see what the next 5 years brings us, for example.
Well, I saw the news, and we'll get into Hyldyr now. I saw the news that you guys have updated a new edition of the Elder Futhark book coming soon. What's the, before we get too much into why Hyldyr, what was the prompt to update a book that already exists so soon?
So we are using a different type of printing now. It's called offset printing, and when we move to this new kind of print, which is the same kind of printing that any major print house would use, we decided to modify the text. Also, Jackie Alberts is now Jackie Alberts Lund, so may as well update it then. And we gained access to a large amount of archival photographs of some of the finds that we wanted to include too. There have also been some developments around certain runic inscriptions that we wanted to update a little bit. And this is actually not that uncommon for runic overviews for them to get updated like this every now and then. Now, we were not going to be releasing a new edition of this anytime soon after this. I think this is a pretty stable edition. I think the other ones were too, but to be honest, we just can't help ourselves from updating the material when we get the chance. Why not? So the old editions are still, they're still quite solid. There's nothing really wrong with them per se, I would say. Maybe a few things I would nitpick here and there, but one thing about Hyldyr is that if we can add more, we will add more. Just as much as we can to help readers. This one is also more aligned with the database I mentioned earlier, and kind of anchoring our discussion to something like that allows readers to dig deeper and find out more about the stuff and get different perspectives on it, and chew on a lot more regarding the topic, which is something we're always encouraging. Anything we do at Hyldyr, we really want people, if they're interested, to go deeper with it, beyond what we present to them. These are ultimately just introductory texts, as detailed as they may be, but these are massive, massive topics with all sorts of intricacies and complexities that should really be considered. And since we keep the books at a price point of about $20 to $30, we really want them to be affordable, especially in an area where quality material on these topics tends to be very expensive and really hard to get. We have to limit ourselves to a certain format and keep it as approachable as possible too. So by linking up with databases and encouraging people to dig deeper, they can then pursue those paths, and they're rewarded for it.
No, that's very cool. I'm a big fan of Hyldyr and the work you guys do. Like we talked about before you take up a chunk of my bookshelf.
I appreciate it.
And like I said, too, I've told you before, but I want to say it so people can hear it. Is like, I think a Hyldyr publication is it's it's an insightful collective of research and a look into a specific subject or topic, um, that gets a extra special look from very qualified people, but it's also a thing of art. They're beautiful the way they're put together. Jackie's work inside those, I
Thank you.
mean, what a gifted artist Jackie is.
Yeah, Jack's
and
great.
and the photographs you guys use and the way just the way the book even feels cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've made a thing of wisdom and something worth collecting for its aesthetic. Even it's a brilliant what you've done with that. 5
Thank you
stars.
very much. I appreciate that. It's important to me that the material is treated with a certain level of dignity and respect, and so we try to really play that up in our presentation too. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to a museum, there's a lot of consideration and concern applied to the experience that visitors have when they're there, and we kind of treat it the same way with our publications.
Mm-hmm. So what publishing's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Editing is, I'm told, is a headache. You're translating things anyway, so I suppose you needed an outlet for some of these. But why go through the trouble of creating your own publishing company in the first place?
So I have a great love for physical media and books. I'm surrounded by books at all times. I've always got books with me. I'm a huge fan. Exactly. I'm a huge fan of books, and I always have been, my whole life. So I worked in digital media for a long time for tech companies in the Seattle area, and ran content operations, content marketing, supervising large teams of writers, editors, subject matter experts, content managers, and stuff like this for a long time. And I really just wanted to gather experts that I knew, artists that I knew, and do something completely different from that. Right? With the rise of generative AI and what that sort of that chaos that it is unleashing on the world, it's a great time to look at physical media and to turn to things that are very human. And there's a little more human than, for example, folklore. It is really the essence of humanity in some senses, in its various forms, whether that's foodways, whether that is legends, local legends, or, folk sayings, all sorts of things, traditional jokes, all sorts of things like this. The human spirit is strongly evidenced in all forms of folklore, whether positive or negative, right? And by digging into this, you're really just digging into humanity in its many expressions, right? It's the very opposite of generative AI and LLMs and, whatever big tech is up to this week. And that's exactly what we're doing. With Hyldyr, we have carved out an alternative space away from these things. We have a really strong no generative AI policy. We apply that across the board. We are really careful about even the programs we use for working with this stuff. We encourage our readers to take it outside if they can, and to think about how different things were then from now, and how common certain human experiences were between today and yesterday. Like if you go out to a lake, it's the middle of the night, you might see some, the moon on the lake. This is the same sort of thing that would have been seen by human beings all the way back to the very beginning of humanity. This is a common human experience over many, many years. And that human aspect is something we really strongly emphasize in what we do. And that was really the driving force. I specialize in Germanic stuff. That's my background. But, folklore studies is a worldwide phenomenon. All people everywhere have folklore, and it's all worthy of study and of interest. You'll find beauty under, every corner with this stuff. So if you even have the slightest interest in folklore studies, and if you never pick up a Hyldyr book, I really strongly suggest that you dig deeper into the topic and find out more about it.
I mean, you've lived in a lot of really cool places. Probably some boring ones too.
Absolutely.
And with such a passion for folklore, is there anywhere you've been? Is there a piece of local folklore that like you really enjoyed that you would, especially if it's tied to a place, like a physical location that people could visit? Is there something that stands out you would recommend?
It's a really good question. I don't know about a place so much as customs.
Mm-hmm.
I remember experiencing for the first time leaving porridge out for the Nissa in Denmark. I thought that was really, really neat. I received some socks for this. The Nissa somehow knew my favorite colors. It was amazing.
That's fantastic.
That was a really wonderful experience for me. I also have written quite a lot about the Hyldyr, the elder tree lady or elder tree mother of Danish folklore, and encountering all sorts of folk material around the elder tree has been profoundly impactful on me, as well as just trees in general. It's a big focus of mine personally. Sacred trees and sacred groves has been a big area of focus for me over the years throughout my life, and we'll be publishing more stuff on this topic in the future. I intend to author an edition focused on sacred trees and sacred groves across the world, with a special focus, of course, on areas that I am most familiar with, which would be the European tradition, but also spotlighting contemporary extant traditions that continue in areas like Africa, India, and parts of Asia, and how at risk they continue to be today. It's a really, really interesting topic, and something that I think deserves far more attention. So anything to do with plant folklore, plant magic, I guess you could say, these things are of great interest to me personally, and I'm always happy to see that other people seem to be interested in these topics as well.
Mm-hmm. You and I at an event a few years ago, we talked about trees being important.
Yeah.
When people ask me what's it like as a heathen, what's the like your favorite thing or the main thing, and I always say at the center of my heathenry is a tree. And they're like, what, you don't mean Odin or something? I'm like, they're cool and all, but I'm talking about trees first.
Well, there's a good historical basis for a focus on trees. And that's for sure.
What is the significance, I guess, of trees? The meaning they reflect in the mythology and the folklore specific to Europe and Northern Europe?
Well, among ancient Germanic speakers, it would appear that the sacred grove, which is a collection of trees, was center of practice and center of worship. Again and again, we hear about this focus on groves. Later on in Old Icelandic material, when we get an origin story for mankind, we encounter the two of them being created from driftwood, right? So again, creation from trees. There's been a lot of discussion about this, you also see, for example, references to humans by way of tree names, evidently reflecting this origin in trees. And this seems to me to be of quite great vintage. This idea of humans coming from trees that have received gifts from gods. And I would definitely encourage your audience to dig deeper into this particular thing, because it is a really, really fascinating rabbit hole to go down under and go down into. And it also has a lot of implications on how people saw themselves and how they related to their surroundings. They perceive themselves to be basically plants with this in mind. And that, perhaps impacts how one would relate to plants just generally. That's a really fascinating thing that I don't think has gotten nearly enough attention, right? As well as the fact that if you come from trees and the center of the cosmos is a great sacred tree, this is also really, really interesting from a self-conception perspective, right? So there has been a lot of discussion about this over the years, and especially recently among scholars, the focus on sacred trees and what it meant exactly. During the Christianization process of the continent, we see sacred trees targeted. What we today call Thor's oak is the most famous example of this. and then celebrated in Christian folklore afterwards. It's a really interesting thing, and I would say, from my perspective, probably one of the very earliest expressions of religion anywhere was probably the sacred grove. A delineated space considered to be particularly holy in some sense, and perhaps used for specific, medicine, or left to its own devices. These sacred groves and trees can take a lot of different forms worldwide, and so it's quite a diverse and complicated topic that is really a joy to unpack and get to know better if you're really into trees and plants like we are.
Yeah, like we are. This does bring to mind too, just a random question that goes in there. I mean, the concept of the trees is amazing to me. Yes. And I have a lot of thoughts around all of that. We won't bore people. There's cool stuff. Mimisbrunnr.info. There's an excellent write up about trees on there still, right?
Yeah, we still have that.
Okay, cool.
The symbol database there.
Okay, cool. Oh no! Before I go to the random question, it comes from a friend of mine and a listener who didn't like my answer to their question. So when they heard I was interviewed, I told them I was going to interview you. They're like, "Well, I want to hear his answer." We'll get to that in a minute.
I'm glad to disappoint anybody.
Yeah, at the foot of this sacred tree, at the center of the cosmos, there's a well. According to the stories, what is the significance of that well, and is that also something we see, being done in local folklore and practice and so on in history?
So I wouldn't be surprised that there is a well at the base of the tree because, trees need water sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it would be, it's clearly a important thing. I mean, water bodies are places where we find things like broken swords placed in them and so on historically. So to pledge something into a well like that would be pretty profound, right? Also, since there are 3 wells, 3 being a holy number, that seems pretty profound. I mean, you're picturing the cosmos here, and it makes a lot of sense for there to be a body of water like that at the base of a great tree.
I agree. Yeah. So the random question is, they didn't like my answer.
Yeah.
The web of weird.
Uh-huh.
Where does this idea come from?
So, actually, the web of weird as a phrase appears as early as a specific translation of the Poetic Edda. It is, let me look that up real quick, which one it is.
We'll play the research music.
Oh, you got research music, great.
No. I do have a button for a drum roll. Dramatic piano.
Yeah, I was actually, approaching this topic again pretty recently, and it's because we were doing a new edition of the symbol book we released some years ago. It's actually a sequel to it called A Handbook of Viking Age Symbols, and it's more than that. It's we cover all sorts of symbols that are related to the Viking Age, so primarily Germanic stuff on the continent, and then in Anglo-Saxon England. But this phrase, web of weird, but spelled W-E-I-R-D, occurs as early as Olive Bray's translation of the Poetic Edda in 1908. But the symbol itself, that we today know as the web of weird, pops up in the 90s initially. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes very popular after that. It initially occurs in a particular book by an occultist, right? It doesn't appear to be like a heathen or anything like this. So, but then it grows legs and kind of changed shape a few times, and you can find variations of it all over the place now. It's a very popular symbol, despite being quite, recent in development, and it's a nice looking symbol. Yeah,
it looks cool. I like it. I use it on some of my shirts.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? And I like the concept. Yeah, I basically explained. Yeah, that came from a book called, I think, Hellrunar, and
yes, it did.
Was popular. He made popular through there, and they thought, no, it's ancient. Like, no,
It
it's
is,
not
but something doesn't have to be ancient to be,
meaningful.
evocative or meaningful.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would expect there to be, you got to expect innovation and change, whether
Mhm.
that's for the better or for the worse is really up for you to decide. But in this case, I think it's a nice symbol, and uh, I take no issue with it personally. I write about it a lot. Actually, the history of the symbol, I believe I was the first researcher to do a serious dive into
Mhm.
it, and so you'll see some of the work that I did in that piece, which is publicly available on the Mimisbrunnr.info website. You can check it out there. We also have an entry on it in the upcoming handbook of Viking Age symbols, which we'll be announcing in March.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Let's see. I guess next, for modern heathens approaching, Hyldyr or other academic works and the mythology and such, what advice would you have for them to get the best out of that? I guess, how should they? What would be the best way to approach it in that manner?
Yeah. So with Hyldyr, as I mentioned earlier, Hyldyr Publications really should be viewed as introductory items. Okay. So whatever they might be on, our goal is at Hyldyr, among our various authors and artists and anyone else that's involved, there are quite a few people involved in Hyldyr Publications. Consider it an entry point built to set you up to better understand the material with further research, if at all possible on our end. Now, we do publish a lot of stuff nowadays that hasn't been published before. We're getting really into, for example, Icelandic grimoires that some of which were previously not known to have existed, that are entering into, for example, Kari Palson's collection. He's a manuscript collector and manuscript restorer, not just a folklorist, not just a scholar. But he has a serious interest in these things, and that's a pretty unique thing about Iceland, that these grimoires, these spell books, are still in circulation there, and quite a lot of them
No
are
kidding.
undescribed. Yeah.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out about this within the next few years from us, as it is an area of particular interest to ours, right? Now, I would say when you're not dealing with Hyldyr books, just be careful. There's a lot of stuff out there that is going to waste your time. There's a lot of stuff out there that is going to try to sell you something beyond the book, right? I would say take a look at who's involved. Are there academics involved? Do those academics have a background in this material? You can be an academic and work on subjects that you are not an expert in, just ask yourself, is this worth my time? Life is really, really short, and sadly too short, I would say, because there's just so many wonderful and amazing things out there that, we're just never going to have time to approach. But when it comes to books, there's just too many bad books to waste your time with. So take a look at it first, assess what it is. If there are academics involved, there's a good chance that it's going to be a solid or useful book in some way, shape, or form. Even if you disagree with the conclusion, you can still get a lot out of it, right? I would say dig into comparative material wherever possible. If you're interested in Germanic heathenry, it really helps you a lot to reach outside of that space too and compare what you're reading to the ancient Germanic record, for example. Reach to cultures that are quite distant from that area, and you can really tell how different things are. There's a different perspective, or maybe you'll notice similarities, whatever the case may be. That's really, really, really valuable insight at the end of the day, to get that. Noting change and difference can really be a catalyst to all sorts of conclusions and different lines of inquiry. I would say that's very, very important and often overlooked in these spaces. Also, like ancient Greek stuff is really, really, really interesting material. It's also extremely old, and you'll find that as you dig into it, how similar people were then to they are now. Just all sorts of observations that you can make all in that. I would say just widen your reading base as much as possible, and make sure that you're dealing with someone who knows what they're talking about. And that's usually expressed by way of some sort of affiliation with university or academics or something. I do not maintain affiliation with university anymore. I guess I'm vaguely affiliated with the University of Helsinki nowadays. But because we do Hyldyr, all the time, we regularly work with academics to make a great effort to bring them in to do things like comment, provide little essays and things like this in our publications. For example, John Lindow, really happy to have him on. He was a huge influence on me coming up. Alexander Sager at the University of Georgia, he was my mentor there, and various other individuals, younger scholars. We really try to bring in as many as we can with our publications. Scholars are, especially younger scholars, are not exactly wallowing in wealth. You may know it's a pretty rough area to be in, and academic publications typically do not pay well at all. If you publish a peer-reviewed paper or something like this, you're not going to get any kind of money for that. That's something that is an expense to you at the end of the day. But with Hyldyr Publications, we pay academics, and we're happy to bring their voices to the table whenever possible, and publish works with them that would otherwise exist in the bowels of some university collection somewhere, inaccessible to the general public and unapproachable if you are to find them. So what we're doing is a little different, and but we're happy to point people to really solid resources, and there's a lot of them. There are probably more scholars active in these topics nowadays than ever before, producing just incredible work. Even if I don't agree with this or that, like I said, I typically can find something of value in the publication that made it worth my time.
Awesome. And I guess one last question from me for the regular portion.
Yeah.
Anytime I've got somebody with academic chops in this realm, I really want to know, what do you think about Snorri? You like
Snorri?
him or not?
Mm-hmm.
The prose edda and Snorri's work.
So I really think that the prose edda and related text gets boiled down far too often as a focus on a single individual, whereas the reality of this is there would have been a lot of people involved in this. In for example, the prose edda, right? You would need informants. There's quite likely, in my opinion, to have been an earlier manuscript that Snorri and other individuals that were involved drew from, which is a really, really interesting topic that I hope to see a lot more discussion about. The sort of proto edda that seems quite likely to have been floating around before the production of the prose edda. The prose edda is an incredibly important source. It contains a lot of material that otherwise we have no records of. There are, for example, quotes from Eddic poems that are otherwise lost, found in it. And I think it's a crucial source. It's a really, really important source. These are one of the texts that I've spent more with than any other, over the course of my life. My assessment of it is that the text is clearly an attempt to preserve as much as possible, and is incredibly valuable and enigmatic for this reason. Now, the big question with it is how much of it was pulled from oral tradition and how much of it came from some sort of earlier manuscript or manuscripts, in my mind, right? I do think that we are just incredibly lucky to have access to this source. That's my comment on it. Now, there is some, rationalization happening in it, and especially the prologue, but it's also a question of if that was actually a part of the version of it that Snorri was involved with. That could be something that was added later. We do find later manuscripts of the prose edda where things have been added to it. That's not that uncommon in the manuscript tradition. So I would say if anyone wants to assess the prose edda, they should dig deeper than a surface level assessment. There's a lot going on here. It is an incredible work, and a lot of time, effort, and money was clearly spent in producing this thing, right? Keep in mind, we don't have anything like this on the continent, except for maybe something like Saxo's Gesta de Norm, but that is not a really a comparable work in a lot of senses. That wasn't really a faithful attempt to preserve a lot of stuff. It had a really different need to be met. It's supposed to be a history of the royal houses of Denmark that had been Christianized, and clearly Saxo had access to the same kind of sources that Snorri and crew had, but what that looked like is a good question. Was it a manuscript, or was it a bunch of oral tradition that just happened to be the same? In my opinion, it's much more likely that it was a combination of oral tradition and some kind of manuscript. So anyway, I can go on about this all day and get really into the depths of it. But I would say to assess the prose edda from the time and place it came from, but also keep in mind that there's a lot of unknowns surrounding it, and having all that skaldic poetry with the skalds by name and stuff, as well as the edicts. I mean, it's just invaluable. It's just incredible that we even have this thing to discuss and draw from. But also keep in mind, it's not really meant. It's not wise to assess something like this outside of its context, and to not look at all of the individual sources one by one, and to let's put it this way: it's wise to approach it with the eye of a scholar, and to approach it with a lot of discussion from other scholars, and to just dig deeper. I mean, it has seen now hundreds of years of analysis, and a lot can be extracted from it still. That is quite revealing, I think.
That's so cool. Yeah, so very cool. Thank you. That was awesome.
Sure. I hope that wasn't just a bunch of.
No, that was a fantastic answer. I can tell that one lit a fire. All right. I think it's about time we could start wrapping up the regular portion of the show. Is there what is going on? Hold on.
Sure.
Oh, it's something to do with my mic, I guess. I don't know. It's as long as it's recording, and it is.
Right.
Anyway, a good spot to wrap up the regular portion of the show. Is there anything you wanted to bring up? Anything you wanted to talk about? Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, my advice, I often end some discussions with an encouragement to just go outside, breathe in the air, and bring a book with you, and also to not let everything bring you down. When you can spend some time outdoors, and you can really feel what it is to be a human being, rather than just constantly being assaulted by big tech, messaging and algorithms, the world can be a really different place. So you can always turn to folklore and related topics for inspiration. If you're an artist and you find yourself, having a hard time coming up with something, you can turn to, tradition, melodies, folk tales. These things are just endless, bottomless sources of inspiration at the end of the day. And they're there for you to utilize as a part of that grand tradition. So, don't be shy, dig in and pursue your interests in this area. There's something for absolutely everyone here. And there's the further you dig, the more you will be rewarded.
Very cool. Agreed. I'll never forget, before we go, the reading circle that you held at that event that I was at. And something you said before we did it was, these stories weren't meant to just be read alone on a page. They were meant to be heard.
Very true.
You said
Very
that,
true.
Sir.
Well, I was right about that.
I'll never forget it.
There's a certain artificiality to encountering, Eddic verse on paper, and I say this as a book publisher, this was an oral tradition. These things were performed in some way, right? It's hard to argue that they weren't. And I wouldn't expect that to be spoken word poetry. I'm with Terry Gunnell and others on this very much. I have a lot of respect for Terry Gunnell and his work. So I was really happy that we could host a symposium that featured him this winter. And I really encourage, whether I agree with his conclusions or not on this or that, and, I have my disagreements, as usual. Terry Gunnell is one of the greatest living scholars today. And his assessment of Eddie verse is that, we can expect some sort of performance there. So going out to the woods or what have you, and just reciting and reading this material with friends is much closer to what it originally was happening, I would say, than just sitting in some dark room or whatever and reading this stuff on a paper. And I think you should always remember that, this is a human thing, very human, and it would have had a particular place among the communities in which it existed. So yeah, definitely, take it outside, take it out off of the sheet, and experience it.
Mm-hmm. I have replicated that reading circle experience a few times, and will continue to do so for as long as people will agree.
That's wonderful.
It creates this really cool atmosphere that brings. It doesn't just bring the stories alive. I like the discussion of each stanza as you go too, because something happens. I've found after about the third or fourth person, there's a charge in the air that wasn't there when we started. There's some people lean in more. They don't lean back as much. It becomes something more alive, and I love that.
That's excellent to hear. I'm really glad to hear that.
Well, thank you. Again, I learned it from you. So, all right. We're going to take the rest of this conversation off to Patreon. But before we do, where do you want people to find you and your work?
Yeah. Check out Hyldyr.com, HYLDYR.com. Hyldyr.com. You can check out our, what we have coming up, what we've got available. And we also post, we do a lot of events. We've done a lot of events over the past year, a lot of them in the Portland area, some of them in Seattle. We did a couple symposiums at the National Museum of Iceland over the past year as well. We're always up to something. And what we're going to be doing will only become more ambitious as time continues. And we hope to see you at these events. And if you ever need anything, just reach out to us. We're really friendly. And we're happy to help out any way we can.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you for being here. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.
Okay. For everyone listening, thank you again for being here. Thank you for listening. Please remember to spread the show around. If you found this interesting, please go check out all the resources we discussed. Other than that, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you're going to have to go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership, and stay weird out there, my friends. And now it's bonus audio time. Joseph Hopkins, are you ready?
I'm ready.
You're ready. All right. These are typically pretty weirdish, morbid. I'm going to change them up for you since I think you could have a much more fun time tackling them in a different way. So
let's do it.
First question is usually, what famous person's resting place would you most want to visit? You're welcome to answer that if you want, but I'm also thinking for you, like, if you could visit any person from the folklore that you study, who would it be and why?
Okay.
Do you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife, what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions and magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram at weirdwebradio. You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun, and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.